Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for joining this next episode of In the Nick of Time. And we're going to get started in about 5 minutes now with Joe. It's going to be a great discussion about memory safety and deep dive into how to move to the next generation cybersecurity practices to protect your software. So stay tuned for another 5 minutes. If you've not subscribed to the show yet, go to inthenickofTime.tv to get one email a week about the next episode. And stay tuned for Joe in 5 minutes. Good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining the next episode of In the Nick of Time. We're very excited today to have Joe Saunders joining us again. He's coming for a second time now on the show, giving us an update on what he's been up to. We're going to talk today and do a deep dive on memory safety. So it's going to be a fairly technical show, but I think it's going to show you the importance of all these kind of new way of thinking when it comes to cybersecurity and defense around your software security. So I think it's going to be a great very interesting deep dive. So stay tuned for that. With that, if you've not yet subscribed to the show, please go to inthenickoftime.tv to be able to get an email a week about the next guest. Next week, we're going to have Bob joining us from Weaviate. He's the CEO of Weaviate, which is the leading vector database used for all the generative AI solutions out there, and it's just what's been empowering Sage to exist, and we'll have him on the show to take a look at what's coming and how is he going to disrupt the landscape around GPT and generative AI, and what's going to happen to the industry as a whole. So it's going to be a great discussion next week at 1 p.m. Um, if you've not yet tried Sage, go to sage.ai and create an account for free. You can also subscribe using the coupon code Let's Beat China, and that's going to give you $5 off, so $25 a month forever. So pretty big cost saving there to get access to Sage and be able to not only use ChatGPT, GPT 3.5, 4 full 32K, which is 80 pages of text, but also Google Bison, which is Google Bard. We're bringing, of course, all your data on top with PDF, Excel, PowerPoint, you name it, and then plugins to be able to automate agents and tasks to be able to pull from different APIs, databases, data lake, and really augment kind of the user experience when it comes to getting access to the new generation of generative AI technologies. So we have 4,500 government teams, 950 companies now. There's a few seats left. It's only, I think, 500 seats left for the $25 coupon code Let's Beat China. So go and try it out and let us know what you think. Love to get your feedback also on plugins and what to build next. And if you have any open source large language models and any capability you want us to add to the platform, please reach out to us and let us know as well. With that, before we bring Joe on the show, wanted to remind you who he is. He's an amazing guy all around. If you got the chance to spend time with him, he's just an exceptional human being. But he's a founder of and CEO of RunSafe Security, really a pioneer tech company in immunizing software without developer friction. Really looking at runtime protection for embedded systems, software containers, and cloud workloads, while also reducing risk across the supply chain. Over his career, he has built and scaled technology companies servicing both the private sector and public sector security needs. Before RunSafe, Joe advised and supported multiple security AI, ML, and data management companies, including Caprica Security, Sovereign Intelligence, Analyze Corp, and of course Thomson Reuters Special Services (TRSS), and even Distill Networks. With TRSS, Joe helped law enforcement agency identify national security threats, including the theft of intellectual property. He was a member of the management team and VP for business development at Targus Info, which was acquired by Newstar for 650 million in 2011. Joe is frequently speaking and panelist, and is regularly asked to author article on cyber issues. Is very interested, of course, in the intersection of technology, economics, geopolitics, and spend time on the security of supply chain, 5G, AI, ML, and autonomous systems, IoT, supply chain, high-value assets, and even weapon programs. And if he wasn't giving back enough to the nation and the community, he is the founder of the Children's Voice International 501c3 nonprofit, which provides scholarships for survivors of child trafficking. And if you've not seen the movie, go check it out, and you're going to see how big of a problem it is nowadays. And consider donating for the Children's Voice International. Great cause, without a doubt. If you want to reach out to Joe, you're going to find him on LinkedIn, and you can see the link here on the screen. With that, let's welcome Joe on the show. Hi, Joe. How are
Nicholas,
you?
it's great. Hey, doing well. It's great to be here, and appreciate the comments up front. And certainly, it's an honor to be here with you today with all you've done for the country. You've listed a lot of things that I work on, but everything you've done for the country is fantastic. So great to be here with you.
No, we're very excited to have you. We can tell, the picture on the slide here is before I beat you at chess. So you are still, happy and smiling and a little bit younger than you are now after I kind of destroyed you at chess. It was pretty pathetic and sad to see, but you literally had to uninstall the application after having to start competing against me at chess. So that's going to be an interesting discussion today. First, to get to know you, but also looking into this memory safety issue that you guys are solving really for organizations. And I think people don't always realize kind of the complexity and the impact of these kind of potential exploit, but I think it's also very complex to handle. I think the lift that you're gonna have to worry about when you facing this kind of threats is pretty significant. But solutions like yours obviously bring a ton of value. So you're gonna be able, one, explain the problem, and we're gonna do a deep dive on trying to explain to people why they should care and why it matters, and also what to pay attention to. But then what are the solutions? So very excited to have you for the second time on the show. First, for people that have not seen the first episode, we'd like to get your journey a little bit, so you can tell us a little bit about who you are and what you've been up to.
Well, I look forward to talking about memory when we get there, Nicholas, as you say. But I'll just say, it may be that your memory is suffering when it comes to chess. So we'll have to get to the bottom of that as we go forward. But we'll talk about memory protection when it talks about software. But yeah, I think your intro summarized it well. I spent a lot of time doing analytics work in the early part of my career as a management consultant. Helped build models for risk for organizations throughout the early 2000s, and then dedicate my career to cybersecurity here since really 2010, just because of the importance to national security and desire to help protect critical infrastructure. And so my career has been mostly on the commercial side, but then also helping the U.S. government with security matters. And I do have a love for international security and geopolitics and the like. So part of that is my motivation, as they say, when it comes to really coming up with solutions to protect critical infrastructure, because it's really at the cross section of geopolitical considerations and national security. And so RunSafe is really built around trying to change the economics from the cyber attack perspective and eliminating the ability to exploit software weaknesses across critical infrastructure. And our team of folks that have come out of NSA and other places, it's a crack team of engineers who dedicate their careers to solving really difficult problems. So that's the idea of RunSafe, is to change the economics, solve a tough problem, and make it easy for our customers to ultimately deploy that software.
There we go. It's been amazing to get to know the team. Obviously, the team is bringing a pretty amazing set of diverse skills. Before we move forward, I wanted to let you know maybe your mic is not connected to your headset, so we're not hearing you as well. So if you want to check your settings, it might be on the app side, not on the connectivity. I don't know, but you play with the stuff. I'm gonna prepare for the next question. So obviously people need to kind of set the stage when it comes to memory safety. And, when you start looking at the complexity of the problem and the exploits, which remains to this day kind of the major source of threats and exploits from malicious actors. So obviously that's interesting to pay attention to, and it's probably the biggest impact you could have, particularly depending on the programming languages being used, C and so on. That's the kind of attacks people are going to try to go after. And so, when you look at the threats, and if you want to summarize a little bit, what is exactly the concept of this memory weakness in code, and how do you address that?
Yeah, and I like to think about it as creating memory safety in software, and it is a critical concern for people. Even if folks aren't familiar with it itself, it's focused in on weaknesses that develop in C and C++ languages, and that kind of software is deployed, is a pervasive type of software deployed across critical infrastructure. And so, members of the national security establishment are very concerned about the vulnerabilities that C and C++ code make available to potential attackers to compromise software. And memory safety then really refers to the practice of employing proper software techniques to ensure that programs access and manage memory correctly. And in computer systems, obviously memory is where programs are executed, it processes data and follows the instructions that developers offer, and properly managing that memory so that software crashes can be prevented, so security vulnerabilities can be reduced, and any other undesirable system behavior can be avoided or attacks can be prevented is the goal. In the absence of memory safety, then the so-called software weaknesses that you referred to opens the doors then for malicious actors to achieve whatever their objectives are to compromise the software, and they can exploit that software, those vulnerabilities to manipulate the functions that are processed in the logic that's being executed. So, these kinds of weaknesses in software, it essentially, allows someone to overwrite, functions with new functions to use, other code after they free up that memory space, and to, create buffer overflows that allow you to, take control through ROP gadgets, the software. And that's what, the big issue, and I'm sure we'll get into this more, is that there are a number of systems that are vulnerable to memory-based exploits, and it results in devastating attacks. You can take control of the software, introduce arbitrary code, do things that the software wasn't originally intended. And so the big concern then is, with these weaknesses in C and C++ software, are there ways that that people can minimize the risk of exploitation? And that's really what we've dedicated our company to help solve.
And people don't always realize now, because a lot of new software is built in Python and Go and Rust and so on. And they don't realize that all these C and C++ modules, applications, plugins effectively have to handle memory in a way that we don't have to think about with some of these other languages. And if you allocate memory wrong, or if you're not keeping track of your assignment to memory, then people can then exploit that to start either injecting malicious code or elevating privileges and running software that's not supposed to run, and also bypass potential security. And so that can really be the source of some of the biggest 0 days and the biggest exploitation of databases and access to virtual machines and resources across a vast amount of deployments. And of course, they're going to be targeting some of the most used capabilities out there to be able to get into multiple devices at the same time, and create this next wave of 0 days. So it's going to be interesting to see what to pay attention to, and what people can do to prevent them. But if you want to give us maybe a tangible example of a recent memory-based attack, what comes to mind?
Well, the most obvious one historically is Stuxnet, and obviously that was a devastating kind of attack for kind of scaring people in terms of what is the art of the possible. In that particular case, obviously we're going back several years to 2010. It was an exploit that targeted Iran's nuclear program, and more specifically its industrial control systems. And once inside the ICS, Stuxnet was able to manipulate the code running on the PLC, the programmable logic controller, and specifically the ones that were responsible for controlling the centrifuges. And if you think about controlling the centrifuges and then also controlling the HMI, the monitoring systems made it look like the centrifuges were running normally, when in fact they were spinning at a higher and higher rate, and those centrifuges were used to aid in the uranium enrichment process. So by suddenly altering the speed and the operation of centrifuges, it ultimately caused them to crash. And so that's a major one, but there are more recent ones. Certainly, there was one in the Ukraine power grid. If I think about memory vulnerabilities in general, the supply chain, and the critical infrastructure with examples that are in U.S. critical infrastructure are vulnerable. But Microsoft and Google, this has been a problem, as you know, Nicholas, since the 1980s. And Microsoft and Google have reported that 70% of their vulnerabilities in their software are memory related. And so there are a number of recent attacks that are targeting Microsoft software that are allowing people to gain access to critical infrastructure. And there's also been ones that, through Barracuda email servers and whatnot, there have been compromises to memory that have allowed them to gain access and to start to do things to exfiltrate data and watch things as well more recently. So there's a number of versions. If you look at the attacks on the Saudi Aramco targeting, at that time there were Schneider Electric devices that were compromised. That's a recent example. Also, there was Urgent 11, which 6 of the 11 vulnerabilities that affected Wind River real-time operating system were all memory-based vulnerabilities that needed to be shored up and patched. So it's really pervasive across any kind of compiled code, and that can include the software infrastructure, the web server, are written in compiled code, even though the applications that write on top of them are not. So it's very pervasive across software infrastructure and across critical infrastructure.
Yeah, it's pretty much everywhere, and like you said, it's probably the majority of the recent issues we've been seeing. MITRE, in fact, publishes its top 25 most dangerous software weaknesses every year. When you read that, what was some of the highlights that you got from it?
Well, some key highlights, and for those in the industry that track this, it's been consistent for forever, actually, since MITRE came out with the top 25. But within the industry, we all know that memory-based vulnerabilities have been around since the 80s, and it's just pervasive. But in this year's 2023 MITRE top 25 most dangerous software weaknesses, and these are weaknesses kind of, which comprise a class of vulnerabilities underneath them. And so what MITRE does is rank the top 25 types of software weaknesses. Number 1, number 4, and number 7 were all memory related. And so the number 1 software weakness, according to MITRE, is an out of bounds write error or weakness that allows any number of vulnerabilities to be exploited. And in fact, in this year's report, what MITRE said is there are 70 known exploits targeting these vulnerabilities in the out of bounds write, which is the most known exploits that are targeting any kind of software weakness that's out there as reported by MITRE. So out of bounds, ranked number 1 in part because it had 70 known exploits. Number 4 was use after free, and again, what's common in the software memory space is that there are so many known vulnerabilities that can be used to exploit. And in the case of use after free, it's CWE 416. There are 44 known exploits, that can be targeted to compromise the vulnerabilities given that kind of weakness. And that is up from last year. Last year, this weakness was number 7. Now it's number 3, in part because those known exploits that have been found has increased so much. And that's the thing with software memory vulnerabilities. There's so many known devastating kinds of attacks that can take control of the software and do nefarious things. That's part of the reason why 3 of the top 7 are memory-based weaknesses, according to MITRE. And of course, number 7, out of bounds read. It's a well-known weakness. CWE 125. There are hundreds of CVEs. There are currently 2 known exploits that are targeting those kinds of weaknesses that are pervasive out there. So only 2 compared to 70 and 44, but 2 alone is a significant number, as you know. And what this often fails to do, and I think it's important, the flip side of this report is it really bases things on known vulnerabilities. And the trick with memory-based vulnerabilities is most scanning tools don't even identify vulnerabilities that are memory related. And that's one of the great issues. And one of the reasons I think why it hasn't been solved is scanning tools often don't find the vulnerabilities. And a study by North Carolina State University going back a couple of years ago, Dr. Lori Williams at North Carolina State University did a study that showed that in Linux alone, over a 10-year period, the scanning tools did not find over 90% of memory vulnerabilities in Linux. And so that just shows that there's different needs that we need to take, or different solutions we need to take to identify weaknesses in our own software. So red teams and targeting, over and above what's in scanning tools is important, and taking approaches that eliminate the exploitability of those vulnerabilities is also important in part of your software development process. So with that reason, I would suspect that the rankings would even be higher for memory-based vulnerabilities if the scanning tools identified more of them. But today, it's still 3 of the top 7 are memory-based vulnerabilities, according to MITRE's top 25 most dangerous software weaknesses.
It's interesting, right? Because all these kind of issues are well known, right? I mean, they're well documented. There's nothing new there when it comes to the awareness. Training has been probably a big piece of the issue when it comes to people making those mistakes. Overall, it's often driven by mistakes and people. But like you said, scanners, there's different level of detection capability. The basic stuff, the scanners are gonna do a pretty good job, but the more advanced use cases is gonna miss that stuff, and you're not gonna get any alerts. So people think in industry, particularly in DoD, having multiple set of eyes reviewing the code and trying to find these issues manually could be one piece of the puzzle, but that's probably not scalable, right? And it's also very slow and painful. So, when you think about what the government, has been doing, and the government has been paying attention and more, being more active, particularly, with Jen, the new, well, she's not new anymore, I guess, but the director of CISA, she's done a great job, kind of completely reinventing the agency compared to how painful CISA used to be. Very impressed with her tenure there. But when you look at what the government has done, right, to achieve this memory safety, what have you seen and what has worked so far?
Well, the past year has been a really, really big year for the government to get behind the need for memory safety. And so the NSA issued guidance in November of 22, calling for people to either deploy memory safe languages or apply other forms of mitigation across critical infrastructure, across embedded software. The Office of National Cyber Director issued its strategy in March of 2023, as you know, Nicholas, and that National Cybersecurity Strategy, of course, is 80 plus pages or what have you. But a key line in there, as it relates to the liability shift and other aspects that it calls for solving memory safety across critical infrastructure. And naturally, as you say, Jen Easterly, under her leadership, CISA has embarked on what it calls secure by design, secure by default. And that really is in part driven to achieve memory safety in software and develop development practices that help to reduce the risk, along with other forms of mitigation that try to take these problems off the table. But it doesn't stop there. Congress has been actively involved the past 2 years, actually, in fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23. Congress has funded technology to get adopted related to memory safety, to apply for memory-based protections in software across the DoD, for example. And even in this past fiscal year 23 appropriation, Congress asked for a briefing from the Office of National Cyber Director on the state of memory safety in critical infrastructure and across the DoD and the government. And so the Office of National Cyber Director will be briefing Congress or committee within Congress later this month, actually, sometime in July or August, I suspect. They were supposed to do it within 6 months of the appropriation. I know they're a little bit behind, but that's coming up soon. So probably late July or early August, the Office of National Cyber Director will be briefing committee within Congress on the state of memory safety. And so if you add up what the NSA is doing, the Office of National Cyber Director, CISA, Congress, at very high levels, there's a lot of coordination around the need to solve for memory safety.
Yeah, no doubt. So maybe we can take a look at each of them, one at a time. I wanna kind of do a deeper dive. So when you look at the NSA guidance, what specifically is it aiming to achieve, and is it just a traditional paperweight, heavy documentation, or is it really, driving to actual outcomes?
So there's two parts to it. The first part is to adopt memory safe languages, and you referred to it earlier, Nicholas, when you talked about adopting things like Rust and Go and different languages like that don't have the memory based vulnerabilities. But the NSA kind of recognizes, of course, that that's easier said than done. If you have software that's deployed that might have a lifespan of 10 or 20 or 30 years, rewriting all your software into a new language obviously it can be a costly, time-consuming effort and would prevent people from working on new forms of their or new features for their software for their customers. And so there's this built-up kind of tech debt, if you can think about it that way, of how do we convert our software to memory safe languages. And that's what the NSA guidance gets to, is let's try to achieve rewriting our software in memory safe languages, but recognizing that not everyone can do that. There are needs for other forms of mitigation. And that does include memory-based protections that can be inserted. There's things like control flow integrity and binary randomization and other forms of memory protection that helps to eliminate the threat of any exploitation. So the NSA guidance recognizes both the need for memory safe languages, as well as going a little bit deeper and coming up with memory protections like binary randomization and control flow integrity.
So, obviously that's interesting because, moving to languages like Rust and other languages that are memory safe, the DoD also has started to think about this and started to push some large weapon systems to start adopting it. So there was a lot of research done on Rust, for example, to start using it for weapon systems. Funny enough, GPT is doing a pretty good job at taking a piece of C code and converting it into Rust. So who knows where that's going to lead, but I think there's some value there in terms of automating the conversion of some of that legacy code and not have to spend hundreds of billions of taxpayer money doing this by hand, which obviously wouldn't scale. Not to mention kind of the cyber challenges there, but uh, I guess that's a good first step. But like you said, there's a lot of legacy things that just can't be updated, so that's going to be interesting. Um, Nor do we have the funding to do it. And so when you compare the national security cybersecurity strategy is great, but it's a little bit bloated on some side, and then on some others pretty vague, and you know that usually doesn't help achieving outcomes. So you mentioned there was a sentence or two about memory safety, particularly on the critical infrastructure, but is that too little?
Well, so I think the strategy and the vision is right, and then it comes down to execution and implementation. And in this case, one of the key things that I only alluded to earlier, but is a key aspect of the National Cybersecurity Strategy, is to look at ways to shift liability from asset owners and grid providers and folks who are managing the infrastructure, and shifting that liability to the product manufacturers who ship the technology that gets deployed in that infrastructure. And so the product manufacturers, would be assuming liability for cyber attacks against software that may, if they in fact don't follow certain procedures. And part of those procedures will be to implement things like memory safe languages or memory based protections and other forms of mitigation as well, and different software development practices to help ensure that they're doing everything they can. And so the idea, and of course the devil's in the details in terms of implementation, but the idea is to shift the liability unless people adopt secure development practices, adopt memory protections, adopt memory safe languages, and the like. And so I think that shift could create a lot of incentive for product manufacturers to deploy, or to update their software development practices and start to add protections into their software and redesign. Now, a lot of those companies are doing a good job today. We work with a number of those companies who adopt memory protections from RunSafe. And so, they may not want to convert to, memory safe languages, just yet, but they want to, do what they can to add in the protections. And certainly one of the issues that I think those folks find when you get to the devil's in the details here is all the open source components that are written that manufacturers use may not be rewritten immediately in memory safe languages. They may be legacy stuff that doesn't get updated, and who do you ask to update that software? And what's the burden if a product manufacturer has to build a utility that they never supported themselves? They just adopted as open source. And so there are, as you can imagine, the lower and lower you get, the more and more complicated it becomes. And as a result of that, my view is to add in protection as much as possible, to change your processes as much as possible, and to do things in an automated way so that you're not exposed to these vulnerabilities. And it's one big optimization equation at the end of the day. And one approach alone won't work. So I think that's the problem with trying to accomplish something as major as shifting liability, is you have to consider all the stakeholders and really take the time to consider all the nuances that could and situations that could arise. And I do think now that they came out with the strategy, I think Office National Cyber Director is working on implementation. They're coordinating with folks like CISA and NSA, as part of that implementation and finding guidance and whatnot. And so there's a lot to be, solved for, but I think the strategy is going in the right direction.
Yeah, what I think is interesting is, what you said when it comes to automation. I think there's no route that's going to be successful if we don't embrace that velocity and automation aspect, because it's just not scalable and it's not going to stick, and software changes too much to be able to do things manually. So I think it's definitely has to be part of the solution there. When you look back at the CISA's, secure by default design, secure by design, secure by default publication, it's been well received by industry. They're pushing industry to do better. They're giving a little bit of guidance on how to get there. Uh, what did you feel was right, and is there stuff missing?
Well, first of all, I have complete respect for two people working on secure by design, secure by default, and that is both Bob Lord and Jack Cable. They are the technical leaders of secure by design, secure by default, and they are engaging the community, engaging the stakeholders, and it's really something that I think does then fit in nicely with the National Cybersecurity Strategy. And in fact, with that liability shift, if you look at secure by design, secure by default, I think that could be a mechanism that helps, clarify where that safe harbor is in liability. And with really strong leaders in Bob Lord and Jack Cable, I'm very confident that the first version is an initial draft, and they are talking to everybody in industry and getting lots of feedback and looking to make changes. But the general software development lifecycle principles are included. They are looking for ways to ensure you can trust the software you deploy, to ensure there's a secure boot, to adopt memory safe languages, and many other design principles in general. And so I am a big fan of what they've started, and I also think there is room for improvement. So as you could probably tell from my comments earlier, adopting memory safe languages is not an overnight opportunity. And it may take 5-10 years for that to actually roll out, maybe longer. And so I think there is a need for interim steps, maybe perhaps a bridge to memory protection, even if full memory safety is not achieved, and that would dramatically reduce the risk profile of software deployed across critical infrastructure. And I know we'll talk about or we may talk about China in a more general sense. But my view is China does have its eyes on U.S. critical infrastructure and targeting memory-based vulnerabilities, and that threat horizon is not 5 to 10 years. It's much shorter. We've already seen that there are some compromises in critical infrastructure related to memory vulnerabilities. So I think it's a great start. I think Bob Lord and Jack Cable are embracing lots of feedback, and they take it with humility, and they look for ways to enhance it. And so if you do have concerns about secure by design, secure by default, I encourage everyone to reach out to Bob and Jack. They will definitely want to hear from you, whether in written form or even meet with them to show what you mean. At RunSafe, we've met with them 3 or 4 times to show some opportunities for improvement, and they've embraced it wholeheartedly because they see it as a national critical issue for us to solve, and they're kind of dedicating their careers at this point to help solve that issue.
Yeah, no, they're awesome. When you look at some of these publications, I guess from the government standpoint, those are great, right? But let's face it, they often end up being paperweight on someone's desk. I'm not sure they often get implemented, let alone, you know, uh, anyone doing a good job at assessing the actual implementation and the gaps. And so, what have you seen when it comes to product manufacturers, putting this into action? Because otherwise, it's all for nothing.
Well, and of course, that's where I think the National Cybersecurity Strategy is calling for liability shift, and that would be the mechanism that really forces people, to change behavior. Ultimately, especially if that means they can achieve a safe harbor from the liability itself for adopting some of the controls and the processes. But as of today, obviously, that's not something that's been rolled out, and there's a lot of concern about it because would a Schneider Electric or a Siemens or ABB and these other examples of companies of product manufacturers that supply technology to critical infrastructure, are do they want that liability shift? Absolutely not. The other consideration they have is that they have hundreds, if not thousands of products. And as I mentioned earlier, those products can have 10, 20, 30-year lifespans. So rewriting software for an older product when the economic model for adopting that product assumed a 10, 20, 30-year time horizon, is puts an economic pinch on the product manufacturer themselves. So they can't imagine rewriting all the software for hundreds, if not thousands, of products in the next couple of years. It would just be very difficult. And so their big concern is, what is the time frame? And if you compare their time frame for adopting things along with the need for the great work that the U.S. government's doing, U.S. government wants something, will need something in the next 3 years, but the product manufacturers, it may not be economically feasible to do that. And so that's the big, crux in the whole issue, is that feedback from the product manufacturers. Is the time horizon realistic? And as compared to the threat horizon that someone like China poses as a potential attacker on U.S. critical infrastructure.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because China doesn't care if the product is 5 years old, 10 years old, or it's just gonna come out uh, of the process of design. I think what's interesting too is these companies are using that as a good excuse, which might be a legit one, but the fact is even their new code often doesn't meet those new requirements. So you can't pretend that's an issue when it comes to rewriting legacy stuff. But what's the excuse when you're doing making the same mistakes, or at least not implementing best software practices for new code that just came out yesterday? I think that's they lose a little bit of their my almighty there when you start looking at some of the work being done. But again, China is not going to care, and so who is going to foot the bill, right? There have been discussions, with DHS. Obviously, has tremendous power now, both with Congress pushing critical infrastructure funding, but also how do we keep track of that funding? Where is it spent? I remember helping at FEMA, get grants for 911 to the states, to stop some of these tremendous issues we still have today with TDOS and malicious actors being able to take down 911 in minutes. And when we got the states a bunch of money to upgrade their 911 systems, they ended up spending the money on something else. So 911 remained you know unimproved, and the issue was not addressed. And so you wonder sometimes, what's right, and how we can ensure that the money allocated and budgeted by Congress on grants and stuff like that can then be applied at the right place. I wonder if that's going to be the same issue, when it comes to updating some of these legacy systems and bringing some better cyber practices to some of these critical infrastructure systems, often run by companies on behalf of states and local governments.
Yeah, it's obviously an issue, and I think if I think about it from Jen Easterly's perspective, obviously director of CISA at DHS, she has done a great job elevating the discussion around focusing in on the threat China poses to U.S. critical infrastructure. And I believe, as we talked about earlier, with the NSA guidance and ONCD's National Cybersecurity Strategy and CISA Secure by Design, Secure by Default, that the government, decision makers related to security and security practices are doing the right kinds of things. But it does come down to then, how do you fund that and how does that work out? I am grateful that Congress has recognized and has funded the ability to protect weapons programs from memory-based attacks. And I think it will be interesting to see how the committees in Congress react when they see the state of memory safety as reported back from Office of National Cyber Director. And also, as Jen Easterly has done on numerous occasions, she speaks pretty openly about that threat that I was alluding to from China. And in fact, at Carnegie Mellon University earlier this year on March 1st, she gave a speech and she described how memory-based vulnerabilities are the single, biggest weakness in critical infrastructure. And China, could potentially attack. If they attack, Taiwan on using military force, they may do a simultaneous attack in U.S. critical infrastructure, from a cyber perspective, and really targeting those memory-based vulnerabilities. So these are the stakes that are out there, and I hope money is not the issue. Although, naturally, as you say, when government provides money, it can always be misapplied and misused. So I hope that cohesion with the liability shift, the clear guidance that Bob Lord and Jack Cable are offering, and perhaps money behind it, that we do have a shot at doing this. I don't think that industry alone will bear the risk without some intervention from the government and some assistance from the government. And the proof there is the past 40 years where that problem has been known. And part of the issue is that the operators are the ones that experience the risk, while the product manufacturers are the ones building the solutions. And so if that helps, I think it's worth seeing if that helps change the equation. I can't guarantee it does solve it, but that's at least the current strategy that I think the government's pursuing. And we'll see how it plays out over the next year. We don't have that much time, though. And so, the input I've offered all those organizations is we need to a bridge to memory protection while everyone figures out the funding and the implementation to achieve memory safety overall. And that's where RunSafe comes in, obviously, is we can help people protect from the exploitation of those same software weaknesses we talked about earlier. And our customers include, folks like Schneider Electric and Lockheed Martin and GE Aviation and all sorts of other manufacturers. And the whole idea is to make that very simple without slowing down developers, so they can keep focusing in on other practices or other features that they want to develop.
Yeah, so we'll start digging now in terms of kind of these solutions you're talking about, because these are at least are available now, don't require to refactor your code, and at least bring kind of this temporary bridge that will be able to buy us time, so that China is not able to keep getting access to critical infrastructure left and right. I was probably the first one coming out of DoD to bring up this Taiwan example of if China were to go after Taiwan, the first thing they'll do is take down 40% of the U.S. grid, so that we're too busy putting it back together rather than defending Taiwan. I wouldn't be surprised if it happened. pretty soon. So we're kind of running out of time. The other aspect is, like you mentioned, right? All these companies doing business, they're not really motivated and don't feel the pain of their lack of due diligence in cybersecurity. I was always surprised that we don't have a law, or at least some level of regulations when it comes to leadership and C-suite executives being aware of some of the existing vulnerabilities in their software, and if it was demonstrated, they were not gonna do anything about it for multiple occasions. I think at some point there needs to be some legal implication, including potentially going beyond the money, the money aspect, and going more on the criminal side. You look at Atlassian. I think it's a great example of a company that's been, lacking in basic cyber principles for years and finding excuses left and right, impacting drastically their stock valuation. So, shareholders would have a claim to say, hey, you're not doing your job. It's impacting the value of the stock, and it's impacting, who is end up using Atlassian products. And yeah, you've seen 0 days after 0 days again and again, and hundreds of CVEs. They in the last year, I think there's a little bit of an awakening, replacement of a lot of people at the leadership level to start tackling down that. But I was surprised that particularly I think a publicly traded company. I understand startups don't have the funding and the awareness, and maybe even the the employee to fix those issues. But there's no excuse for a publicly traded company not to pay attention to cyber, particularly when you sell to critical infrastructure, product. I think that's no excuse there. So, looking at the solution, right? Clearly, the long-term solution is going to be painful. It's going to take years, and who knows? It's clearly these companies are still not even addressing the problem with their new code. So really, it's a compounding factor of time to end up fixing, because we're going to still be fixing in 2050 the software that was released in 2023, let alone the one released in 1970. So in the meantime, right, your vision is a little bit different, and I always liked it, because I think not only it applies to anything, but it's wrapping the solutions around the existing software to mitigate those issues without impacting the performance of the software too much, and without impacting the actual features of the software and how the software behaves, which is probably the most difficult piece, right? Anyone can make something secure. You can turn off your laptop, but that's not going to be helpful to anyone if you can't use the software anymore, right? So what's the vision of RunSafe, and how did you implement it? I think it's kind of very interesting, because for me to get excited about something, it takes a lot. And when we met, I don't know, that was what, I don't even know, 6 7 years ago now. And you told me about this stuff. I was like, this is actually interesting.
Yeah, and I always appreciate the support, Nicholas. And I remember that first meeting when we met, and he said, first time someone's really surprised you with something new, in terms of the novel approach. And the approach and the vision is built around, trying to add in security protections, assuming bad actors will get inside software, inside networks, insiders will get in, and assuming that developers are not perfect. When Google and Microsoft say that 70% of their vulnerabilities are memory-based ones, obviously they are great, software development organizations, and they still are vulnerable to these kinds of weaknesses and exploits against them. But going back to RunSafe, the idea is that we want to insert protections into your software build processes without developers having to do anything, themselves. So it's a 15-minute integration to get our technology deployed. For some people who are speedy, can probably do it in 2-3 minutes, like you, Nicholas. Other people, it might take 30 minutes if they're not quite as speedy as you. But very simple implementation, and works within your DevOps environments. And the whole idea is to take part of the software build process, collect some information about that build, and then when the software loads out in the field, what we do is we randomize where the functions load into memory uniquely every time the software
Every time.
loads. So whether it's your
That
device,
was a game changer, right? The random runtime. So it's not just a build thing that's happening once.
right?
That's build and runtime components, which I think is very novel.
Yep, and that's what makes it so interesting. And we do that without any performance overhead introduced. And so, people are very excited about that. They don't have to think about, all these memory vulnerabilities. And the benefit then is that if you have a patch or fix, and obviously you should fix those, right? But you can smooth out your patching process. You don't have the mad, emergency crises that get something out in a couple of days that your customers will take, 6 months or 12 months to deploy anyway. And so, there's all sorts of benefits to that. But then, more recently, we've taken a broader view and we've adopted, because we're part of the software build process, we see everything that goes into your products, all the packages, all the libraries, all the components. So we're generating a software bill of materials in a novel way as part of that build process. A lot of people who are building a software bill of materials are doing it on a binary itself and making some assumptions about the dependencies and the dependency tree in there. We see every individual dependency that goes into your code, so we know those second, third, and fourth order dependencies within your dependency tree. We know what those are and know what those components are, and therefore have a good sense for which components you're taking in from open source that could lead to these memory-based vulnerabilities. So what we do now is, in addition to adding in the protections, we build that software bill of materials. We identify the vulnerabilities associated with all those components. We score all those vulnerabilities to show you which ones we take off the table, and we automate the hardening of that by doing that randomization at load time, so that every time the software loads, you're protected uniquely from the previous time. And so with an SBOM generation, identifying the vulnerabilities, scoring the vulnerabilities so you see the reduction in the attack surface, and then automating the mitigations for you, then you have an enhanced SBOM that can say, I've taken these 70-80% of these memory-based vulnerabilities off the table using RunSafe. So huge benefit there. And what's interesting is we have built that so it all works inside GitLab and GitHub now. And so, developers, from the developer's perspective, all they're saying is, do you want to harden this component that's vulnerable to using RunSafe protections? Yes or no? And they can click yes all the time or click yes, individually. But the idea, we have one customer that has, say, 1,000 components in their software product that they deploy in data centers across the world. And 800 of those components are open source libraries and packages and whatnot. 800 packages, and we're able to automate the protection of all of those, eliminating the memory-based vulnerabilities in that. So their entire product stack is protected from memory-based vulnerabilities. So we're looking at that as showing you all the visibility into your software supply chain, into those dependencies inside your code, seeing the components that other SBOM generators don't see, and then automating the protection so that we take those off the table. So with that, we're trying to stay in tune with the secure by design, secure by default principles, and really look at the software supply chain and all the dependencies that are in your code that may leave you vulnerable, even if a scanning tool can't find it.
And so two things, right? What programming languages do you guys support?
We support C and C++ languages built in Linux and built in real-time operating systems like VxWorks and Lynx OS and other RTOSes because they're so pervasive across critical infrastructure. So applications built in those languages is what we target. We obviously also can support Windows-based applications and the like, but more generally than our protections, another constraint is on the instruction sets in the hardware chips that are used. So we support, Intel 86 and ARM 32 and 64-bit processors. So even when there's really low constrained memory environments, we're actually a good solution because we don't increase the aspects to it. We don't increase any performance overhead, and so in memory constrained environments, we're a great option as well. So, with that, we've got a very strong offering for Linux and real-time operating systems, which is where majority of our customers we focus on are deployed. And one of the things that I've seen is people are shifting to Linux-based OT and IoT devices more and more. And they're using things like Yocto to manage their build processes and grab things from source as they do the builds and whatnot. And so we fit right into those processes to ensure all those components you pull into your packages and your products have run-safe protections built in.
Yeah, the only issue I see with it, it might be too good so that people end up just using RunSafe and not actually fixing on the long term the memory problem of their software. So, there's a debate there as far as, okay, is it a stopgap thing, or is it a long term fix? I guess it depends. I think for legacy software that's going to disappear, that might be good enough to hold on and not update the software. But for other things, I guess it gives you time, and you should still use it, by the way, even after you fix it. But I think it's just a debate as far as is a fix too good so that it relieves too much pressure from the manufacturer to fix the software. So that's just interesting there, food for thought. And the other aspect is, why is it so important to have this random memory of the functions and stuff? It's because, many of the exploit, right, that malicious actors are going to create are going to be built for that memory. And so they're gonna try to, go after those memory space, and they reuse the same exploit across instances. So it will be very difficult for a malicious actor to have to rebuild an exploit for every instance, and if it changes for every runtime. Effectively, that's an endless nightmare for the malicious actors.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And I want to come back to the short term versus long term in a second, but I'll just point out one other thing. We did a study recently, and we looked at we have a process now where we can score memory. Compiled code written in C and C++, and how many potential attack vectors are there for 0 days to be built. And so we have this analysis that shows how vulnerable your software is to various forms of assembling together ROP gadgets into a ROP chain. And those are really the building blocks for these memory-based attacks. And so in one analysis we did, because of the randomization and the granularity we go to in that randomization to achieve those protections, there are potentially up to, in some software code, in a lot of the common things that people use, we did analysis of Apache Web Server and the Python interpreter and other standard open source packages. When we looked across those packages, a single binary has roughly 200 functions in it on average. But a software package, a full software package, might have thousands of those, if not more. And in an analysis we did across those open source packages, there's over 245,000 potential ways for memory-based attacks to be administered by stringing together weaknesses in code. And when you randomize using what we have, a single information leak in most approaches can take advantage of those weaknesses and create ROP chains from the ROP gadgets to administer a memory-based exploit. But all 245,000 of those ROP chains are taken off the table to the attacker. So, it's one thing to say you can't rewrite your exploit for the next device, but we're now saying that you can't write an exploit to target this software that's protected by RunSafe because all the ROP gadgets are taken off the table from assembling them into logical sequences to administer an attack into a ROP chain, for example. And so that's an interesting angle. And I do like your thought on the short-term, long-term. So I want to be clear that RunSafe embraces memory-safe languages. We do it for two reasons. One, we use memory-safe languages in our code that we write and ship. And we spent time doing the conversion. And so it was good business for us to do that. And I think it is good business for everybody to do it. So we don't want to stand in the way of people adopting memory-safe languages in their products. We recognize that the open source components present a barrier to achieving memory safety, so memory protection will be needed. We also think it will take time, as you say. And really, it's the time issue is what we don't have. If you think about what you said earlier, and I'm glad you mentioned your comments on the risk coming from China attacking our critical infrastructure, is some people will say that's within 3 to 5 years. I don't think everyone can rewrite the software in 3 to 5 years. Long term, do I think it's the right approach? Absolutely. But we need memory protection today, while we, as a bridge, while we achieve memory safety tomorrow. And tomorrow should come as fast as possible. So I'm embracing that. As a company, RunSafe embraces that. We want to help people make those transitions, and we are looking at all those different things that you can do in secure by design, secure by default. So RunSafe solutions over time are evolving, and will continue to provide service even if you're using memory safe languages. And the reason I know that is because with our software bill of materials, as we identify the vulnerabilities in your code, we are coming up with other forms of mitigation that are exposed, whether they're memory based or not. And so there's a lot of considerations. I think it's a transition. I think everyone's better off with a faster transition. But naturally, with RunSafe solutions, you can be protected now and still achieve that transition.
And you guys also support containers. So what kind of work have you guys done on trying to see how to get closer to the source of some of these open source bits and Linux or other things where you could be embedded or built in into their processes so that people using these containers or things would already have your protection built in?
Yeah, it's, especially in the open source community, that's where we're seeing a lot of adoption. But one of the things that I think is most interesting in that area for us is we have a software monitoring tool we call Flare. And what Flare does is it collects software crashes. And, containers can go up and down in minutes or seconds even. They can light up and light and go down again, naturally all the time. And so it's very difficult to really recognize when there is an event that was an unintended abort in a container, and understand actually what happened. And so what we've done is we're conducting studies on honeypots and different systems, and some of our customers that have large web-based infrastructure that are leveraging containers and whatnot. Is we have Flare deployed, and we're collecting software crashes themselves, and it might be one out of 10,000 times a container goes down within a minute. It's actually happening because it's a software crash, and it might be more than that, but I don't know the exact number. 1 in 100,000, I think, is the number. But that one instance is insightful. So we collect 20 different state variables about that crash, and give insight into whether that is a bug in the software or something systemic that might be exposed from a cyber attack inside your infrastructure. And so that's one thing that we're doing to try to understand the nature of the problem in containers. And as you know, Nicholas, all the methodology that goes into building software that it gets, that is usable within containers, creates a lot of security in the overall process. And so you can automate the security testing. You can make changes and deploy easily. Long gone are the days. Ideally, long gone are the days of hardware-based software solutions that are tied together, and it would take 6 months to apply a fix and get an authority to operate again. Under your leadership, Nicholas, the ability to get continuous ATO and things like that, just a profound change. And so what we want to do is just contribute to the process, understand when crashes are happening, understand why they're happening. And you can imagine if a network like the DoD's network, or in a war area like in Ukraine, understanding what those things that are causing software crashes in infrastructure are, that's really good insight into the nature of your software infrastructure and what's needed going forward. So we're focused in on monitoring, in those environments, as well as providing the protections, especially when they're deployed in Linux-based environments.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually a good insight when it comes to these crashes, because that's a good hint. That's probably something that could potentially be exploited down the road. So that's effectively a early warning of a potential 0 day coming to life. So brings a ton of value there. So you kind of hinted at it, and with US bomb and stuff work, and kind of your visibility across uh, the software ecosystem there, you can bring a lot of future uh, solutions to life beside the memory safety stuff. But what's next? What's the next big thing?
Well, I think understanding the risk within the open source software and coming up with forms of mitigation and helping people achieve the secure by design principles and secure by default principles. I think those are next on our list. And naturally, there are other vulnerabilities in software at runtime that I think we can address. And so, those are the next two areas that we're addressing. And the supply chain is first because the ecosystem is beyond the control of many great software development teams, and they need to understand the software composition that's in there. They need to understand, which software can be trusted. They need to understand which software has vulnerabilities in it, and so at least our customer base is focused there as the next area, and our customer base has historically been product manufacturers shipping software into critical infrastructure. And so in some ways, those organizations were, naturally a little bit behind in terms of where enterprises were with cloud computing and using that to modernize infrastructure. But now a lot of these, IoT devices are connected to cloud environments, and there's still a lot of modernization in terms of, AI that can be done, and also just kind of revamping software architecture. So we'll follow what all that kind of leads. I have a personal interest in Chat GPT and AI and things like that, and I like the vision you have, Nicholas, around the potential for not just using that for productivity reasons and efficiency reasons, but really understanding, as you kind of indicated earlier, what can happen from a security perspective. What are the vulnerabilities in AI systems that could lead to compromise? We've done some things to put our protections in open source components that are used in AI infrastructure. And so I think those are all domains that could lead to great things. But in the short term, it's really the open source compiled code that's used in your infrastructure in ways we can knock off things for that. But lots of potential down the road as well. That's why I embrace the trends to shift to memory safe languages over the next 5 or 10 years, because we'll be shifting with the market, introducing new solutions as well.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Well, you opened the cans of worm there, so obviously I gotta ask you the question. Obviously you know very well AI and generative AI as a concept, but when you look at the impact it has and is the future also coming up, just in cyber defense and cyber compliance, you look at Sage itself, our entire IMF, NIST 853 controls were written in 7 hours by Sage, um, and we had received a quote of $300,000 from a company to do it in 6 months, right? So within 7 hours, $250 of tokens, kind of completely disrupting the entire compliance universe, including wrote our GDPR documentation in a day. Something that companies charge hundreds of thousands of dollars to write. So obviously, tons of potential beyond the gimmick of writing things and playing with stuff, right? I think that's what people don't always understand. That's where they get started. And I was the first one probably to use Chat GPT to write my YouTube videos, and I was just a pretty face reading the stuff, and that's great. But then we started to do more exciting things beyond the gimmicks and plugins, integration to data lakes. And now that Sage, as Sage is trained on as Sage itself, we're able to now really do a lot of automation, because we respond to RFPs. It knows what we do, and it does a great job. Just writing the response for us. It took us from five days to 32 minutes on average to do a bid response. So, a lot of value. Cyber, I think it's going to be kind of an advanced of the SOC and the SOAR capabilities to start connecting things and making kind of small decisions at first, and particularly when it comes to labeling data, categorizing events, and back to your point on detecting if a container crashed, um, or if it just stopped. I think that's something GPT would do a very good job at detecting. For example, looking at the logs and the telemetry of Kubernetes. So what's your take on generative AI, and is it going to change the world? Is it just a gimmick that's going to die like blockchain, or what is it?
I think it's going to change the world. I think it's starting to. I think folks like you are creating real solutions. And yeah, I've done a lot of the fun little things when you first start playing with it. Wrote some PowerPoints. Asked it questions that you just can't get answers in any succinct way from Google, and sort of be surprised by how relevant it is. But I do think in the security domain, as one example, whether you can write some code or you can analyze some crashes or you can write some exploits, it does change the nature in which productivity of these things, whether for good use or maybe potentially nefarious use. Um, you know, Generative AI is going to kind of change the world. I also think in different industries. So I love the fact that you're focused in on the benefits to the government. To, think about how the financial institutions could benefit, all the compliance-oriented ways. And those are all in the efficiency ways of productivity. The fact that you can develop a solution that that develops the program to comply with all to show how you comply with all the controls against a standard is simply phenomenal. I mean, that is a game changer in and of itself. Humans alone can't do all that work, and like we were saying earlier, it just takes way more money to do that. So I think the economics are in favor of generative AI catching on fast for these productivity reasons, and also long term for effectiveness reasons as well. I think developing code that is secure, developing exploits that are dangerous. I think both of those are on the table. And like any other technology, I do think there are dual use concerns, and so we have to look at how can it be used negatively or nefariously against us, as much as And I personally don't think the Department of Defense, for example, is ready for that. I'm not even sure they have a full grasp of the domain of generative AI at this point. And certainly 6 months into it, if really the wave hit last November, or started last November, in kind of mainstream areas, then I just can't imagine that the DoD will have its arms around the extent of the problem. And yet I think actors who might create content that isn't real could also be created. So there's a lot of potential risk. None of it is sufficient in my mind to slow down the innovation that occurs. All the applications that are happening, things like Sage, are phenomenal. I know another group called Consensus, focused in on analysts focused in on the healthcare arena. They're getting very, very significant adoption in a specific domain, on scientific research. And you can imagine all the volumes of content that you have to absorb if it's in the DoD looking at the FAR regulations, if it's in a cybersecurity standard like 800-53, absorbing all that content and writing all that content. There's just too much volume for humans to process, and it takes too much time. And so generative AI, I think, is going to catch on fast and apply real benefit in the short term for efficiency reasons, consuming information, summarizing information, making information useful going forward. And so it's here to stay, and long term. And I always like the hype curves that Gartner puts out. They say that there's a lot of hype, and then it'll tail off, and then it'll explode again. And people overstate the benefit in the short term, and then it crashes, and then they understate the long term effects. And I'm sure there will be that sort of that S curve with generative AI. There will also always be that kind of trough of disillusionment, is what Gartner calls it, where people just don't see the exact utility. But then there will be even more profound second wave. So short term and long term, though, I think there's high utilization both in efficiency and effectiveness.
Yeah, you mentioned malicious actors, and of course Beidou gave their GPT models to the CCP across Fabric. Meanwhile, like you talked about, DoD is still fighting or misunderstanding the benefits of generative AI, even at the CUI level, so let alone on the secret and top secret fabric. Obviously, we've seen velocity increase from 10 to 20 times the velocity of a normal human without the technology. So, imagining, the CCP with an increased velocity compared to what they already have is even more scary, when you compete already at a disadvantage of number of people, and their communist regime is able to force people to do things, and we don't have that. So obviously all that compounds to more risk and more threats, and it's also used to write malware, and I wouldn't be surprised if, when you look at agents and what we can do now with step-by-step automation, removing human decision, or at least bringing human just to say yes or no in the process. You can build agents now to automate tasks. It could very easily be used to use the generative AI to discover new vulnerabilities and targets in the discovery phase, and then I wouldn't be surprised if 5 years from now, a generative AI agent could potentially be used to exploit entirely a set of devices automatically with no human involvement. And so that means the all these memory weaknesses and things that we see could be obviously exploited much faster at a much increased pace, but also is doing a pretty good job at finding memory leaks. So you talk about the static code analysis tools. We built that SH a plugin to scan a Git repo looking for cyber issues and performance improvements, which most static or dynamic code analysis tools are not capable of doing. In our case, it's not only writing code improvement, but also detecting malicious or vulnerabilities in your code, including SQL injections and XSS and memory buffer overflow and stuff like that. And it actually does a much better job than some of the static code analysis tools. So I wouldn't be surprised if these tools are going to be used to then detect more 0 days and more vulnerabilities on open source code, and even IP that was stolen by China from private Git repos. And the only way to fight that is going to be through automation and through the same means. And that's why I think Sage is very well equipped to be used on the defensive side, and the agent and the plugin we can build in Python and so on, we give that access to our customers for them to be able to build their own decision trees and complex integrations. And I think that's going to completely disrupt. And I think, like, you're right, most people get started with the basics and the chat aspect. They don't realize, for example, we're using Sage to label data in data lakes. It does a way better job than humans at doing that and categorizing data, for example, in a complete autonomous basis. Same thing for cyber, review of code and performance improvements and documenting code. I hate documenting code, and he's doing all my comments for me on my code base every night and create a merge request in my Git repo, and I just have to click yes and review it and make sure it's good, and he's gonna it's completely automated. So that's pretty cool stuff.
It is really cool stuff, and what I like about the Sage platform you built is the extensibility with all the plugins and continuously adding capability as a result of that. When there are new use cases and new plugins added daily, or however fast you do it, Nicholas. I mean, you probably do multiple times a day for all I know, but adding in that extensibility into a platform to capitalize on the opportunity to improve code quality, improve security, improve productivity of work that humans are doing. I think there's just endless possibility. And so most people are playing with the interface. You've been thinking about the workflow, the infrastructure, the plugins, and the process oriented questions and getting things right. Sage is far and ahead the leader from my perspective in thinking through how do you build out solutions and applications and create the automation. A lot of people are still playing with the interface, but you're creating
Right.
automation by using the plugins.
Yeah, and I think it's also the abstraction to Microsoft and Googlebot and others, and now we have about 7 open source models that can run air gapped, and I think not being locked into a model is going to be critical long term, and being abstracted also on your data ingest, and being able to ask questions to different models based on your use case is going to be important. We're the first one ready to abstract the ingestion of data and support PDF, Excel, and all that kind of stuff into any model. Of course, companies will, like Microsoft and Google will push you to use their tools, but what kind of vendor lock-in do you get into when you're training your data into these environments, and you have no ability to or you have to completely redo the training if you were to try another model? I think that doesn't work. So both that, the security aspect, of course, zero trust, and controlling who gets access to what data and how and when, all the way to the plugins. We did SQL, Postgres, and MongoDB and Elastic integrations, but we do it so that we pass the user information to the plugin, so that if you don't have access to all the tables, or if your role is not supposed to have access to PII or whatever, we limit what tables and fields you have access to in the database. So when you ask a question like, show me how many customers have signed up in 2023 in May, with a first name starting in Nicholas or whatever, that's going to write the query, but it's gonna hide the field that you're not supposed to see. And so all this kind of stuff that we've done, I think, with LBAC and complex next generation access control, that's going to be the stuff that people are going to start thinking about in a year from now. So we're already, probably 12 to 18 months ahead. But I think that's where you want to be with this kind of technology, because again, nobody's waiting for us to figure it out.
Absolutely, and I can imagine you probably leverage this in your chess game these days. Is that why you started playing chess again? Is to leverage Sage to help you, make decisions on moves? Because I noticed you had stopped playing chess because you were probably being beaten a lot, and so maybe now you're using Sage to help with improve your game once and for all.
It's just when you get too good, there's a point where you're like, why should I be there? Some people uninstall the application when they get frustrated, and then some people are too good and they have to uninstall it because it's just boring at that point. So that's kind of the problem here. No, I mean, chess is just very tough, right? And let's face it, I don't know how people get to the chess master level and stuff. We're both very far from that. We still have fun. I still win, of course, but you know, that's always pretty interesting to see how we may be the best in cyber, but we're not the best in chess, that's for sure.
Well, I do have one question for you, Nicholas. Who was the last person you lost to in person when playing
You.
chess? Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, I just want to
But you know
clarify
why,
that for the
right?
record.
Because you were making me play on the real chessboard, and I have never played on a real chessboard. I only play on the app, and it's completely different, right? I couldn't picture. It's interesting actually how that impact the brain. Funny enough, I was
Yep,
a little shocked where it doesn't move. I mean, it's just you don't see the picture the same. It's interesting
exactly. I understand.
until you play. So we're gonna have to play virtual, and but you uninstalled the app when we started playing, and then you got scared. So I don't know what to do now.
You're
So
right. You're right.
all right. So obviously, last question for you. That's the one I ask everybody, for the last 5 minutes, and we're gonna give you the parting words after that. We just want to remind everybody, Bob, the CEO of Weaviate, was gonna come to talk to us about the vector database and generative AI, and how this enables people to bring the data, and what's the next generation generative AI capabilities are gonna look like. He's a visionary. He's been able to bring this vector database concept on premise air gapped, and without Weaviate, Asage would not be able to exist in classified and disconnected air gapped environment. So it's going to be a great episode next Tuesday, 1 p.m. But over to you, not only for the what keeps you up at night, but also the parting words. Wanted to thank you again. I really think this episode was great to show people not only what to pay attention to when it comes to memory and software, but then also when it comes to potential solutions and what to do now and not in 3 years to address some of these issues. So tell us what keeps you up at night.
Well, certainly losing to you in chess keeps me up at night. And but more seriously, I think that we are in an interesting point in history, and I know that sounds like a cliche, but I do think that we are in competition with China. And Nicholas, you've pointed this out for a while, and China has a lot of advantages to influence the future of the international order. And U.S. is still the leader today, but technology, innovation, research and development, these are the areas where it'll keep our military ahead, and will keep our ability to protect our society functioning normally. And so we need to find ways, in my opinion, to maintain that technology lead. We do have one advantage in the U.S., which is venture capitalists invest in high risk ventures that push the envelope in technology. We also have the entrepreneurial spirit, like you, Nicholas, starting, Sage, and really showing how to apply things like generative AI for good use. Those are advantages that we have in the U.S. But China has some advantages of putting the state behind the mission to helping prioritize what gets done, how it gets done, and things like that. And so when I think about you calling for the concerns about attacks on critical infrastructure, and Jen Easterly calling for protection of critical infrastructure, especially in light of the threat China poses against Taiwan militarily, potentially. It's the bigger picture is the international order and how those, the freedoms that the U.S. has, the free market economy that we have, that like-minded countries around the world have, the interdependence of our economy around the world. I think a lot of those things are potentially at risk if China becomes the world leader. And so what keeps me up at night is 20, 30, 40 years from now, what does the world look like? And that's why I appreciate what you do, Nicholas, is you call for beating China today. I think we all need to do that. I think the U.S. needs to do that. I think business leaders need to recognize the importance of that. We need to continue, obviously, to invest in research and development and innovation and technology. And we need to do that through venture capital, but also through science and technology within the government, through the universities, and just ensure that we are the innovative leader forever. And if we don't, the world could change. So how we maintain leadership in technology and innovation, I think, is fundamental to how the international world order plays out, and what could happen 20, 30, 40 years from now if we don't beat China today.
That's it. Absolutely. And I guess over to you for, if you want to say what to reach out to you and how they can get in touch with you. And again, wanted to thank everybody for joining this episode and making sure that our kids have a fighting chance at winning against China 20 years from now. So thanks, everyone. And over to you, Joe.
Yeah, so feel free to reach out to me, Joe Saunders of RunSafe Security, Joe at runsafesecurity.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. My username there would be Joe Saunders at the end of the LinkedIn profile. I also have a podcast called Lessons from the School of Security Hard Knocks, where we do talk about China and security and cybersecurity and other topics. So you check it out on Lessons from the School of Cyber or of Security Hard Knocks as well. Thank you, Nicholas, for all the time today, and thank you for everything you do for the country and for innovation and technology. Faster than most people, as everyone knows, and I'm just a big fan of everything you do.
All right, thanks everybody. Thanks, Joe, for joining us. It was a great episode. See you next Tuesday with Bob about the vector database. Stay safe, everybody. Bye bye.